The longest-serving royal consort in British history has been laid to rest in St George's Chapel, Windsor. The Duke of Edinburgh's coffin was followed by the Prince of Wales and his sister and brothers, 8 days after their father's death at the age of 99. The Queen sat alone in the chapel, mourning the loss of a much-loved husband. A small congregation attended the funeral, closing a remarkable chapter of modern royal history. Good evening. 8 days after his death, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has been laid to rest at St George's Chapel, Windsor, in the presence of Her Majesty the Queen and a small congregation of family members. The service, in line with the Duke's wishes, was restrained, with no tributes paid, as the Queen sat alone, a widow after 73 years of marriage. The Dean of Windsor paid tribute to Prince Philip's kindness, humour and humanity. Ahead of the service, more than 700 members of the armed forces had taken part in a military and musical tribute before a nationwide silence was then observed. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell was watching the day's events.
It was at Windsor Castle that they fell in love. It was wartime. The young Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten spent his leave at the castle visiting the then Princess Elizabeth. They were married in 1947. They spent many of the happiest moments of their 73 years together at Windsor. And it was within the ancient walls of this castle that the nation paid its final tributes. Drawn up in the spring sunshine on the castle's quadrangle were the military detachments. They stood with heads bowed and rifles reversed. The scale was smaller than would have been the case without the pandemic, though that's hardly something that would have troubled the Duke. He, after all, had choreographed much of what was to follow. The Land Rover hearse, which the Duke had helped to design, moved to its position by the state entrance. The Duke's coffin was borne on the shoulders of a bearer party from the Grenadier Guards. The coffin was covered with the Duke's personal standard and surmounted with his sword and naval cap and a wreath from the Queen. With great care, it was placed on the hearse. Behind the hearse were members of the royal family who were walking to the chapel, headed by the Prince of Wales. A royal salute sounded, and the first sight of the Queen, accompanied by a lady-in-waiting in the state Bentley, taking position as the order was given for the procession to step off. Close by was one of the horse-drawn carriages the Duke had taken such pleasure in driving. On the seat, his cap and gloves. Among the members of the family walking behind the coffin were Princes William and Harry, the focus of so much attention, walking with their cousin Peter Phillips between them. The procession wound its way past the castle's round tower. By the side entrance to St George's Chapel, other members of the royal family stood with their heads bowed. The Queen made her way into the chapel, pausing to look back as the hearse moved on down the hill. On the wreath of white roses and lilies on the coffin was a card on which were the handwritten words, "In loving memory." At the west door of the chapel, the Royal Marines bore the coffin up the steps. Inside the chapel, the Queen took her place in the choir. Before they entered the chapel, the bearer party paused as a field gun signalled the start of a 1-minute silence. The coffin was borne into the chapel and placed on the catafalque. Around it, the 30 members of the congregation, all of them masked. The service began with a tribute to the Duke from the Dean of Windsor.
With grateful hearts, we remember the many ways in which his long life has been a blessing to us. We have been inspired by his unwavering loyalty to our Queen, by his service to the nation and the Commonwealth, by his courage, fortitude and faith.
The small congregation sat in its family groups. The Queen sat alone. So did Prince Harry. After prayers, the commendation was delivered as the Duke's coffin began slowly to descend to the royal vault.
In the name of Jesus Christ, who suffered for thee, in the name of the Holy Spirit, who strengtheneth thee, may thy portion this day be in peace, and thy dwelling in the heavenly Jerusalem. Amen.
And then a distinctive touch, characteristic of the Duke. Royal Marine buglers sounded the Royal Navy's call to action stations. At the end of her husband's funeral, the choir sang the national anthem. Seldom can its words have had greater poignancy. The family mourners departed, a widowed queen to her castle, and 2 brothers, William and Harry, walked away together alongside the Duchess of Cambridge. The Duke of Edinburgh is gone, but the brothers know that he would have wanted the family to move on and for differences to be healed. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
And Nick is with me in the studio. The point you made at the end of your report there, Nick, it's often said, of course, that funerals can bring families together, that any rifts can be healed. Will this be one of those occasions?
Huw, the one thing that we can say surely with certainty is that no one would have wanted this distraction on a solemn day such as this. Certainly not them, certainly not their grieving grandmother. But there is a rift, it's bad for them, it's bad for the royal family. So far as one can understand, William feels very disappointed, let down. Harry feels resentful. He's also very bound up now with the attitudes and the lifestyle of California. I wonder what impact this brief but intense re-immersion for Harry in his old royal life today will have had on him. He's been surrounded by the entire family on a day of heightened emotion. He's been surrounded by the military, by uniforms, by ceremony, all the things he rather enjoys and admires. Everything today will have said to Harry, duty, the thing that many people feel he has walked away from. Now, what sort of interaction has there been? Well, there was minimal, so far as we could see, interaction between them as they walked down to the chapel. There was some engagement we saw there as they walked away after the service, Harry talking to Catherine. William seemed to be rather reluctant to engage initially. One has to hope that they have found the time in the hours since to have a proper heart-to-heart with each other, if only out of deference for their grieving grandmother and for the memory of their grandfather, who certainly would be saying to them, surely, move on, sort this out. Perhaps that will be the one positive and tangible thing that might come from today.
Nick, we'll talk a little later about the way that maybe responsibilities within the family are going to evolve further in the months and years ahead, but for now, thank you very much. Well, outside the walls of Windsor Castle, despite the fact that police had asked people not to gather because of the COVID restrictions, there were some small groups determined to pay their respects. Some had stopped to leave flowers, and others praised the royal family for setting an example by limiting numbers at the funeral service itself. Our royal correspondent Daniela Relf reports on how Windsor and its people responded to the events of the day.
There was a quiet, early calm to Windsor. Picture perfect for this day of solemnity and remembrance. The town, the backdrop to so many royal occasions, had been asked to do something different today. To stay away, to not gather and abide by COVID rules. Despite the warnings, people still came, just not in the usual numbers.
Just like to be here because of the whole situation, and it's so sad on Prince Philip's passing.
We are outside, but we are inside in a way, you know what I mean? So that's different. You don't have that feeling when you just watch it on TV.
We can see people who came to pay respects, and we are like, for a day we are a community here, so it's nice.
At 3 o'clock, the gun salute could be heard beyond the castle walls. And Windsor, like elsewhere, fell silent. At the Castle View retirement village in Windsor, the funeral was an emotional watch.
Well, you're quite moved by it, you know, surprisingly. You know, more than you think it's going to.
I feel very privileged to be here and support a special person whose life is very well spent.
A shared experience. The Haller family lived near Windsor and watched together.
I felt it was very sad that the Queen had to sit on her own. That was a real big picture, probably something you're never sort of expected to see.
I thought that it was really nice that because he was with us for so long, and it was nice to be able to say goodbye.
Today the normal rules didn't apply. The crowds were smaller, the remembrance restrained. But the memories of a man so strongly connected with this royal town will endure. Daniela Relf, BBC News, Windsor.
The Duke of Edinburgh, as we know, was the longest-serving royal consort in British history. And in that role, he undertook more than 20,000 engagements in Britain and around the world, promoting charities and causes that were close to his heart, such as conservation and innovation and technology. In the past week, people who met the Duke have been sharing their memories, as our correspondent Danny Savage reports now.
This is the legacy the Duke of Edinburgh has left behind.
Right, girls, so it's your silver DofE training day.
On the weekend of his funeral, young people are out facing the challenges of what they call their DofE.
Right, girls, are you ready?
Yes!
Let's go.
These schoolgirls from Manchester were in the Peak District, participating in the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme, very much aware of the significance of today.
I think he was an amazing man and was really important to the Queen. 73 years of marriage is obviously quite a long time, so he's left a humongous legacy behind. He's brilliant. Like, I feel honoured to be able to take part in something like he's founded.
I feel really, really sorry for the Queen because I know he was such a big, big part of her life. But I think that he's really just going to be with us for a very long time. He's got such a big legacy with the Duke of Edinburgh Award.
Alison Bray is one of many thousands of people who would have gone to Windsor today. She has worn black since he died. She and her friend Bev have been to all the recent big royal events and have made their own picture books of photos they took. But today she had to reluctantly stay at home.
I like to go down to the events because I like to be part of the atmosphere. I do feel extremely sad that I can't go, but at least I can watch it on the television.
Also watching at home in County Durham was Ronnie Alaka. 8 years ago, he invited the Duke to open a local school project.
I would like to remember the day that I spent in the moments we shared over lunch. He was quite a witty, funny man. He was inspirational on the day. And I think he had this uncanny knack of putting everybody at ease. He changed people's lives for the better.
The Duke of Edinburgh's century-long journey may have ended today, but for many years to come, young people will be outdoors in his name, acquiring the life skills he wanted them to have. Danny Savage, BBC News.
We'll talk a little more about the events in Windsor later on in the programme, but let's turn now to the latest on the pandemic. And the government figures out today show that there were 2,206 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means that on average the number of new cases reported per day in the past week is 2,534. The latest daily figure for the number of people across the UK in hospital with coronavirus is 2,186. 35 deaths were reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. On average in the past week, 26 deaths were announced every day. And the total number of deaths so far across the UK is 127,260. Let's move on to the vaccination programme. Nearly 120,000 people have had their first dose of a COVID vaccine in the latest 24-hour period. That takes the overall number of people who've had their first jab to over 32.5 million people in the UK, and the number of people who've had their second dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period is 485,000, and that means that the overall number of people who've had their second vaccine is nearly 9.5 million people. Some other elements of the day's news. The leading British choreographer Liam Scarlett has died at the age of 35. His death was announced a day after the Royal Danish Theatre said it had cancelled the production of a ballet that he'd been working on following allegations of offensive behaviour. Mr. Scarlett was investigated over sexual misconduct allegations at the Royal Opera House last year, but he was cleared. The Czech Republic is expelling 18 Russian diplomats over their alleged involvement in an explosion at a munitions dump back in 2014. The Czech police have also tweeted images of the two men they want to speak to in connection with the incident, and the men appear to be the two Russian intelligence officers who are sought by the UK in connection with the Salisbury poisonings in 2018. Right, it's time now then to catch up with all of the Saturday sport. Let's join Ollie. Hi, Ollie.
Thank you, Huw. Dozens of sports events were rescheduled today because of the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, and others paused for a minute's silence. In the first of the FA Cup semi-finals, Chelsea ended Manchester City's hopes of a clean sweep of major trophies, winning 1-0. Here's our sports correspondent, Joe Wilson.
Wembley in sunshine and in silence for the Duke of Edinburgh. Well, two talented teams in good form competing to reach the FA Cup final. Dark blue of Chelsea flowing until the finish. a manager who expected better. The second half began with Kevin De Bruyne in pain, the star in Manchester City's galaxy. His match was over. And soon Chelsea were ahead. Timo Werner was quick. Zach Steffen in the City goal was drawn in. Thus the goal was open.
Hakim Ziyech puts the ball in the back of the Manchester City net.
1-0 could have been 2 almost immediately. This time the goalkeeper was in the right place and Hakim Ziyech had the regrets. Manchester City had their moments belatedly, but in truth not many. He has other competitions to consider, but the FA Cup opportunity is now Chelsea's as the season stretches towards trophies. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Premier League highlights are coming up on Match the Day after the news, but stay right there if you want to know what happened. Sheffield United have been relegated with 6 games still left to play. A 1-0 defeat at Wolves confirmed their return to the Championship after 2 seasons in the top division. Norwich City have made it back into the Premier League at the first attempt. They lost to Bournemouth this evening, but were already sure of promotion, with other Championship results going their way. The World Snooker Championship is underway, and with the latest easing of lockdown, a limited number of spectators have been allowed in. That meant that the crowd favourite, Ronnie O'Sullivan, had a crowd to watch him win his first match. Laura Scott reports from Sheffield.
An iconic venue for a significant moment. Opening its doors to a few hundred snooker fans, the Crucible was tasked with kick-starting a science-led programme of crowd pilots. Those in charge feel a responsibility to get it right.
There is a huge amount of pressure on the team here. It is about the wider picture. The government test is about, can we produce protocols which will allow other venues to open? That's cinemas, it's theatres, it's everything that would be a public gathering in an indoor space.
To take part, ticket holders had to show proof of a negative lateral flow test and sign a consent form. They were also asked to have PCR tests before and after the event to help assess any transmission risk. But the extremely vulnerable under-18s and pregnant women were advised not to attend. After so many months away from live sport, there is said to be some reticence among fans to attend events like these again, and no session has yet sold out.
Champion of the world, the Rocket, Ronnie O'Sullivan.
In advance of the tournament, Ronnie O'Sullivan had said he wanted protection from over-exuberant fans, but the lucky few inside stayed calm as he got the tournament underway. And when the nation paused to remember the Duke of Edinburgh, so did the afternoon action.
It is obviously different when you're there. You get a bit more of the atmosphere, and just nice to actually be able to just go out for once.
Good to be back. Not the best game.
Other pilots are taking place at Wembley, with 4,000 fans attending tomorrow's FA Cup semi-final. If the data proves that this and more can be done safely, it might not be too long before this site becomes familiar again. Laura Scott, BBC News, Sheffield.
And you can, of course, follow the snooker on the BBC Sport website. But for now, let's back to you, Huw.
Ollie, thanks very much again. Ollie Foster there at the BBC Sports Centre. Let's have more than on the main story, the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh at Windsor. The Queen, according to her family, has said that the death of Prince Philip has left a huge void in her life. They first met back in the 1930s. They were married in 1947 and their partnership spanned 9 decades. Our home editor Mark Easton reports from Liverpool how the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh became one of the most successful matches in the story of the monarchy.
Liverpool gives a true Lancashire welcome to Princess Elizabeth.
In spring 1949, a young couple went to Liverpool's Anglican Cathedral at the end of Hope Street and drew a lover's knot on the third pier of the nave. The entwined E and P remains carved into the fabric of the building to this day, the physical embodiment of a marriage that was to last more than 73 years.
The Princess and the Duke move into the giant...
Among the choir boys attending that day was Jeff Holliday, now in his 80s. He recently lost his wife, Helen, after almost 50 years of marriage, and feels for the Queen as she bids a final farewell to her husband.
I would say that the Queen is feeling this tremendously at the moment. Even though you're prepared in a way for such an event, and I feel for her actually, and I have a lot of respect for the Duke as well, because I thought he was a great guy.
I just can't imagine what it would be like after 72 years of having somebody that you can have a moan to, or you can go home to and express your disappointments or problems or the things that are worrying you. and now they're just to be an empty void.
Elizabeth and her husband waved to the cheering crowds.
Their wedding in 1947 was a distraction from post-war austerity, a flash of colour on the hard road we travel, as Churchill put it.
You are now husband and wife together.
This weekend, Victoria and Kevin got married in Liverpool Town Hall. A moment of joy in a land struggling to recover from the pandemic.
The best feeling ever.
Yeah, actually, just to be able to add you to it.
Yeah,
you know,
so
it's
happy.
done and, you know.
So.
In Liverpool, as across the Commonwealth, the Queen and Prince Philip came to represent constancy and commitment, a partnership that endured the pressures of family turbulence and public scrutiny.
I think that the main lesson that we've learnt is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
And I think Jack always thought I was his best friend as well.
Pat and Jack Begetigan will celebrate their 67th wedding anniversary tomorrow. Still together in their Merseyside home, they respect the example set by the Queen and Prince Philip.
She must be devastated losing her husband after all this time. I mean, he's been there steadfast, standing not beside her, but, you know.
Just behind her.
It's very difficult that, isn't it?
What strikes me about your generation is that real sense of duty and of resilience and determination.
It's just being tolerant, I think, and enjoying each other's company is the most.
I'm being lucky.
Being what?
Being lucky.
Yeah, we were lucky finding each other.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years, and I and his whole family owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
The Queen made her wedding vows before God, to love, to cherish, and by tradition to obey, till death us do part. Mark Easton, BBC News, Liverpool.
Let's have a final word with our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell. One thing we can be certain of, Nick, even at this stage on a day like today, is that the Queen's sense of duty and continuity will not change.
That's true. I think, Huw, that many hearts will have bled for the Queen today, irrespective of whether you support the monarchy or not. She did look very alone at times. Now, of course, that was accentuated by social distancing. The rest of the family will support her. She is stoical and resilient. It's characteristic of her generation. But we shouldn't forget that in just 4 days' time, she will be 95 years old. The load, of course, is being lightened. Now, that will continue and it will intensify. The Prince of Wales, Prince William, other members of the family will do more to share the load. But there is a period of transition. That has been happening for some years now. There is no question of her withdrawing or retiring, but of course there will be a period of grieving and adjustment. And then next year, the country will celebrate the Platinum Jubilee. It will mark her 70 years on the throne, and it will be an opportunity for the country to show its appreciation and affection, not just for a long-lived Queen, but for a late husband who did so much to support her and whose funeral we've witnessed today.
Nick, once again, many thanks. Nicholas Witchell there, our royal correspondent, with some closing words. And that's it from us tonight. We will leave you with some of the powerful words and images from today's royal funeral at Windsor Castle. From all of us here, good night.
Today in St. George's Chapel to commit into the hands of God the soul of his servant Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
For his resolute faith and loyalty,
for his high sense of duty and integrity, for his life of service to the nation and Commonwealth.